Hi, I'm Mike, and this is NFGeeks. This video is another video answering a question from Ask Dr. Mike. Ask Dr. Mike is something that happens on the Facebook forum for NFGeeks every Sunday, where people submit a question, and whatever question gets the most likes wins, and then I answer that question. And this video is the answer to this week's question. So the winner this week is Luke D'Ambrosio. And his question is about humor, and this is a very interesting question because I've actually thought about this. So here's his question. I'll read it. Here's what he says. Is there any relationship between type and sense of humor? Would an ISTJ find a certain kind of thing funny compared to an ENFP? How is humor generally expressed by each type? So that's a great question because I've thought about this. And here's what I think. So first of all, I think that any type can be funny to any other type, okay? So I think it's possible for I'm sure it's possible that any type can laugh at any other type that's trying to be funny. Otherwise, comedians would have very, very small audiences, okay? We wouldn't be, it would be impossible for any one comedian to get a large audience because they would only appeal to their own type. And I say that because a lot of people think that a comedian is their type because they think it's funny, or they think they're funny. I don't think that's the case. I think just because you find someone funny doesn't mean that you have parallel types, or you're even in the same temperament. Okay? I think any type can be funny to any other type. I think it gets type specific when someone or something is not funny. I think that when a person thinks something is not funny, it's because that other thing is from a different type or a different temperament's sense of humor, So I think that's when you see some type differences, when something isn't funny, In fact, I bet if there's sort of controversy about a joke and some people think it's funny and some people don't think it's funny, I bet it runs type specific or temperament specific. I'm sure that it probably would. So something not being funny, I think, has more to do with type than something that is funny in terms of who finds it funny and who doesn't. Okay. And I think it makes sense that type and temperament would interlock with this, since so many other things are related to type and temperament in terms of knowledge and values and expressing oneself. It makes sense that so would humor, that what is funny, how you express comedy and how you experience comedy would be temperament and type specific, because it would follow the directions of the functions and all that. So it definitely makes sense to me that humor and funniness, if you will, would go together. So now, before we begin though, I want to say that one aspect of comedy, and this isn't necessarily type related, but I think it's important because maybe each one would have a version of this. But Steve Martin once said that comedy is not pretty. Okay, and he's right about that. For something to be funny, something has to sort of be being made fun of somewhere. Okay, in the joke, there's always something in that. You can't be totally sensitive and totally funny at the same time. There has to be some sort of, I wouldn't say a lack of sensitivity, but an understanding that something is going to be made fun of, even if it's the self. There's always something with that. So we have to remember, comedy is not pretty. Okay. So I'm going to go through the temperaments more than the types, because I can't say that I've experienced how every single type accepts something that's funny or expresses something that's funny. So I'm going to go more temperament because I got that down more. But that's an important distinction. There's a difference between being funny and getting funny. Being able to make the joke and getting the joke. Many people get the joke but aren't funny themselves. They don't act funny, but they get jokes. So there is a difference there, and I do think it's type specific a little, or there's a general trend within the types, I think. But I'm going to kind of stick to temperament. All right, so the first temperament I want to talk about are the NTs. Okay, we'll start with the NTs. And NT humor is basically pointing out irrational things, okay, sarcastically, pointing out irrational things by talking about them as if they're rational and make sense, but in sort of an obvious sarcastic tone that they don't. Okay, so they're looking at this, again, something irrational in the world. They're doing an analysis, very NT. They're doing a rational analysis of this thing that is irrational, but then talk about this thing sort of in a sarcastic way as if it is rational, but really it's obviously not rational, and they're pointing that out, how irrational it is. And there's two comedians that come right to my mind when I think about this. And the first one is George Carlin. Okay, I've seen a lot of different things that George Carlin's an NF or an SP or an SJ. He is an NT. He is absolutely an NT. And that's because he has a very, complex, deep thinking going on, not deep feeling. I don't get the impression that George Carlin was empathic or sensitive. And believe me, I've been watching and listening to George Carlin before, most of you were even born. Okay, so I'm very, well aware of my George Carlin. But it seems more that there's an analysis of irrational behavior. And he talks about that. And again, he talks about it in a way as if it's rational, before he delivers, sort of his punchline of how stupid it is. But there's always a part in it where he's sort of talking about the irrational behavior through its own rationale as if it's rational. For example, and this is a very famous bit of his, I don't even know if it's funny anymore because it's an old bit where he talks about stuff. He talks about his stuff and how much stuff he has and where's he going to put his stuff and how he has to take stuff with him. This whole thing about stuff. It's very comical. But, that's really a deep thinking analysis of consumerism and, ownership of things. And, he's really going through this whole thing of how stupid that is and how ridiculous it is. But when he's doing the routine, he's saying it as if it makes sense and this is what he should be doing. But that's not the case. The way he delivers it is showing his true analysis of it. And it's an NT analysis. It's making a critique of society. Okay, there's nothing sensitive in that, Another good example of this, in more up to the 21st century, is Ricky Gervais and the way he talks about the Bible and the way he talks about the Old Testament. It's very, very funny, the way he does it. But the way he does it, he reads from the Old Testament and then sort of talks about it a little bit as if the rationale makes sense, or there's this other rationale that would justify it or whatever. Really, he's pointing out the whole irrational point of view of religion and religious thought. But it's sort of, but that's the joke, sort of going into it, talking about how it's irrational, as if it is rational, and then, making fun of that. That's a very NT humor. He's definitely an NT. I think George Carlin's an ENTP, if I had to guess. I would give him more ENTP. And I think Gervais is probably an INTP, maybe an INTJ, I don't know. I'm not into him, so I'm just kind of going on the few times I've met him. But he seems like an introverted NT, and George Carlin seems like an extroverted NT. So that's where I'm going with that. So that's NTs. Now SJs, I don't know if there's any SJ comedians that I can think of. Off the top of my head. I mean, I'm sure there's some, but I can't think of one that I would think of as being SJ. But I think it's important to point out that SJs are not humorless in any way. I know that we think of them as humorless, and that's because they do humorless jobs, I think. But I don't think they're totally humorless. For example, Noah is an ISTJ, and he's quite funny. He thinks of funny things all the time. We have good laughs together. He's totally, and I don't have to explain jokes to him, like he immediately gets it. My brother-in-law is an ISTJ. He's very funny. He says very, very comical things. I think the comedy from them, and ESTJs, I've known ESTJs to be pretty funny. ESFJs are probably the least funny, but they still laugh. They still have laughter. It's not a sensitive humor. That's the thing about SJs. When they're laughing at something, it comes from a place of insensitivity. Not that they're trying to be insensitive. They're not. They're absolutely not. But their lack of sensitivity, this is true of the STJs, their lack of sensitivity allows them, gives them a green light to be funny or to laugh at something. Okay? So, for example, Noah likes to watch, skater accidents and things like that on YouTube because that's funny, and it's a judgment of their foolishness as opposed to their irrational behavior, from the NT position. It's more of a judgment that they should just know better not to do this dangerous act, But actually, Noah's insensitive humor, I should say it insensitive, but because that's not exactly right. It makes it sound like he's purposely trying to do it. Again, it's just that because it's not there, he can just go forward into someplace funny. So, for example, when we watched The Man of Steel this summer, okay, you know, we went to all the superhero movies this summer. So we went to go see The Man of Steel, and we were walking out, and I was trying to, like, you know, it's sort of a hit and a miss, The Man of Steel. So I was trying to talk about the things that I liked, and you know, I like Diane Lane, it's, you know, Martha Kent and all that. And so I said to him, I said, well, Noah, what did you like? And he said to me, well, Dad, you know, I like that scene where Superman punches stuff. And I also like that other scene where Superman punches stuff. And let's not forget that scene where he punches stuff. Okay, now that was hysterical. I know that's one of those had to be there stories. That's okay. That was pretty hysterical in the moment because he wasn't thinking about my feelings or anything like that. He was, you know, I was trying to like find some positive reason to like this movie, and he totally shot it down. And what was so funny, and this is another thing about, you know, maybe the S and the T, is that he was absolutely right. If you've seen Man of Steel, it's just Superman punching everything. I mean, it's just punching one thing after the other. You know, that is the movie. Now, what gets better is that we saw it again on Father's Day. We saw Iron Man and Man of Steel back to back, and so, you know, like a comic book nerd Father's Day thing, just him and I. And we saw the Man of Steel again, and it's at the beginning of the movie, you know, with Krypton and all that, and Jor-El is trying to get the Codex and save, you know, Superman, let him launch off the thing, and they're all trying to get him. And you know, it's a very intense scene, and Noah leans over to me and just says, "Look, Dad, even Jor-El is punching stuff." And my God, we just burst out laughing. Because again, the kid was right. I mean, this is so ridiculous, this Man of Steel movie. Everybody's punching something. They even got Jor-El punching. Okay, that's how much punching's going on. You know, and then he started riffing like, "Dad, I think Krypton punched itself." You know, into destruction. And the insensitivity part is that he didn't care that we were cracking up in a movie theater filled with people who were trying to watch this movie quietly. Like, he did not care. He just wanted to keep going and going on this because it was hysterical. And so, you know, his sort of insensitivity to everyone around us let him go on and on. That was funny. I mean, we were laughing about it 20 minutes into the movie and just trying to hold it back, you know. So I think that's where SJ humor is. But SJs get jokes. My sister, ISFJ, she gets jokes, you know, all the time. Now, SP humor, I think there's a bunch of things about it. Obviously, it's very impact-oriented. You know, they want to make an impact. And so there's a couple of things connected to that. One is, I think slapstick was invented by SPs. Okay. One, because it's funny. Although I think it's SJs that actually watch it and think it's funny. More than maybe the SPs. But I think SPs invented it because, you know, in slapstick, no one's really getting hurt. It's actually totally choreographed. You know, it's like a dance, actually. So I think there's something very SP about that. I think practical jokes is very SP and goofing on people. Not necessarily that they're stupid, but just finding anything to goof on them and then goofing on that one thing. Okay. And so that, all right, so practical jokes relate to that, but also other types of funny in terms of that. And also, I find that SPs like to make themselves laugh of all the types, and that's what. So there's two levels of funny. One, it's funny. Whatever they're doing is pretty funny. At the same time, them laughing and thinking it's funny is also funny because that's part of the act. Okay, you know, that's part of the whole thing. So, for example, my friend, and it's all very SP and sensual. My friend John, who I've talked about a bunch of times, he would latch onto a word. Okay, he was an ESFP, and he would latch onto a word that he just thought was funny sounding, or just, you know, he hadn't heard it in a while, just something. He would just think it's funny, and then he would repeatedly say it. Like, first of all, he'd just say it over and over, but then he would work it into any sentence, and not sentences that had to do with that word. Like, he would just take one word out of the sentence and replace it with that other word, you know, see how often he could do that. And he wanted to see how much he could get people annoyed by doing that at the same time. And he thought that was hysterical. The whole process, he would just laugh and laugh and laugh. So, and I have like a million stories of that. One, I'll just say one short one, is that I don't know where this happened, but somebody had said something about something being fluffy, and he just got attached to that word immediately. So he started saying it all over and over again. One of his funny voices, you know, had a ton of funny voices, so he would say, you know, fluffy, you know, he would just saying it. That's one of his voices, and he would just say it over and over again, and then he'd work it into a thing, you know, like, oh, this spaghetti is tasting fluffy today, you know, and he would just do it so much until people got annoyed and wanted him to shut up, and that's when, you know, he thought it was very funny. You know, So I think cracking themselves up is something specifically SP. I think ESFPs are one of the funniest of all types. I think ESFP and ENFP, I think, are the two funniest types. It's funny, it's very similar, isn't it? But I think those two. And then ENTP, I guess, because again, I think George Carlin was an ENTP. So there's something about the E and the perceiving that makes it funny somehow. But I think that's SP. Slapstick, impact, cracking themselves up. You know, I think that's good. Also, just being funny in the moment. Like, again, like my friend John, he just heard Fluffy. Somebody said it. It might have been his dad, I think, said Fluffy, and immediately he started going off like that fast. You know, so I think that is a part of SP comedy and being funny. Now, lastly, I think NF funny is very layered in the human condition. Okay, so it's really not so much pointing out irrationality. To a certain degree it is, but it's really talking about the foibles of humanity and people, and you know, and making fun of that and pointing that out, and pointing out suffering, you know, turning suffering into comedy and things like that. And it's very, I find, and this is very true of me in ENFP comedy, but also any NF comedy, is that on the surface it just seems very, you know, nothing specific. It's funny, but then you go underneath and there's all these levels going on about humanity, and there's always some deeper point to it, you know, about it, even though it's very comical, and it's all about people and the inner world of people. A good example of that, there's two, is one is Bill Cosby. And again, he's been attributed to being an ENFP, and he is an ENFP. I definitely think so, because you know, it's funny, but there's also this deeper thing about life and the human condition going on. That's what makes it NF. I saw him on, I think it was David Letterman, not too long ago, or maybe on YouTube maybe, and he was talking about being, you know, what's it like to being an old person, because, you know, he's old now, and he just started riffing on this all sort of how old people are irrational, not saying that, but he suddenly became one of those irrational old people that can't hear, shouting, and he goes up to, you know, Paul Schaefer, and he's asking him things the way old people ask you things. You know, he's acting like that person, and so it's very funny. But at the same time, he's acting the way an old person really is, and trying to fumble and bumble through life. You know, so there's this whole other deeper level underneath it that, you know, part of it's not too funny, it's kind of serious, but, you know, Bill Cosby brings it out into this funny thing about being old. Another one is Louis C.K. I'm convinced he's an ENFP. You know, somebody actually posted this, him being on Conan O'Brien, and he was talking about cell phones and why you use cell phones. And the funny thing about it is that he started describing why we go into cell phones, and without saying it, he's actually talking about existentialism, okay, and existential angst, and the existential vacuum, and things we do to fill the vacuum, you know, inside, and that inner loneliness, and how the phone is an abstraction. Kierkegaard would say that it's an abstraction to reality. And now, he didn't say that. He didn't say Kierkegaard or existentialism or any of those things, but watching it, I immediately recognized existentialism. Everything he's talking about is existential. So much so that I realized, like, okay, he must be into existentialism or knows of it, because otherwise he couldn't possibly be making this joke this way. He's accidentally nailing existentialism, you know, he couldn't possibly be doing that. So that's when I started realizing, oh, he's an ENFP. Look at the layers, you know, going on here. So that's how I think NFs say funny. Okay, so we're almost done, and you know, some people might ask, well, Mike, is there any, you know, what temperaments or types are not funny? And the question didn't actually ask that, so I think that answer is outside the parameters of the question, I think. But but you know, the title of this video is a joke, so I guess I should complete the joke. And so the joke is, you know, why did the INFP cross the road? Well, they were trying to get, why? Well, they were trying to get to the chicken to make sure its feelings weren't hurt, because it didn't want any conflict between that chicken and the other chickens. And this is because for an INFP, poultry harmony is a very important value to be committed to. See, that's kind of funny.